Okay, let's get the morning started. I'm James Latwell. I'm happy to be here to welcome you back to the live Edgar Symposium, the first one we've had since the pandemic. So, yeah, thanks for being here. We appreciate that very much. And yeah, big thanks to Marjorie Flax for getting this back together. She's the spirit of this entire week. But also Chris Monty, Kelly Nichols, and Kathy Danneman, who pulled all of this together to get us here together. Without them, we'd be talking to the naked cowboy out on the street. So, but, you know, his talent is underrated, but, you know. But this today is going to give you a chance to kind of get to meet our various award nominees, learn more about them, their work, and what makes them tick. Hopefully you'll be here with us tomorrow to see who walks away with one of our awards. There's a lot of anxious, I think, nervousness going on, but that's a good thing. We'll cap off the day with an interview with our two grandmasters, Laura Lippman and John Sanford, led by our very own Oline Cogdell. So that's going to be a nice thing to end with. The panels are going to be all day. We'll break for lunch. There will be video so that you can look back on them. I think next week they will be posted on MWA's YouTube channel. There will be time for questions after each panel. Please make sure it's in the form of a question. It's not about you. It's about the panelists, and we'll keep it short. But our first panel is Can You Juggle? Keeping Multiple Storylines Straight, moderated by our very own MWA president, the incredible Lisa Scottoline. Off we go.
Thank you all for being here, for getting up so early. You're going to have the same girl crush I do on these women. They are, each of them, incredible writers and so fascinating. And what I'm going to do actually for probably the first time in my life is actually shut up and let them introduce themselves. And then we'll proceed into talking about good nuts and bolts things and open up to questions. Sulari, why don't you start us off? Tell them who you are. And I'll tell you first that she's an astrophysicist in her past life. What?
I went to university to study astrophysics back in those earlier days where I knew less what I was doing than I do now. I'm Sulari Gentill. I'm from Australia, as you might pick up with the accent. I live in rural Australia in a small town in the foothills of the Snowy Mountains. So that'll tell you a little bit because there's not much of Australia that's snowy. And so I live in that little part, and the Snowy Mountains is the iconic Australia of snowy mountain country where the horsemen ride chasing brumbies, etc., etc. It's that sort of history. Tiny little country town. We have 1,000 people, and that's counting the people in the cemetery. I started off, I went to university to study astrophysics because as a young child, my father used to tell us stories about the constellations in the sky. And so when I was a child, every time I looked up at the stars, I'd be filled with this sense of wonder. And I thought that meant I should be an astrophysicist. But what I realized when I went to university was what I'd fallen in love with was the stories that my father would tell that were woven into the stars. You would have thought I would have picked up then that I should perhaps write, but instead I became a lawyer. Because it takes a while for things to get through. And I was a corporate lawyer for a lot of years, but I became a serial hobbyist. So I was one of those people who has done quilting and stained glass windows and ceramic doll making, and I build gardens like I live in Babylon. And one day I had sort of finished the welding course and was looking for something to do. And I thought, I'll write a novel. And it was only then once I sat down and started writing, that I realized that it was as natural as breathing to me. And the thought of stopping was like the thought of stopping breathing, not something that I do voluntarily. So since then, that hobby has sort of expanded to become my life, and now I write.
Yes, and you're too modest to mention that you are the Mary Higgins Clark nominee today. So this whole panel is nominated or decorated with something, so it's really incredible. Isabella, do you want to go next? Isabella is the person all mystery writers will want to collar at the cocktail hour, and you're going to find out why.
Hi, I'm Isabella Maldonado, and I think that what she's referring to is that before I started writing crime fiction, I wore a gun and badge for 22 years. So I started when I was 10. I'm sticking with that. So I was inside the D.C. Beltway area, Fairfax County Police. It's the largest department in Virginia. That was the department I was with. So it was a big department. And I really enjoyed my time there. I started off way back in the late 80s. And when I started off, I was often the only woman on the squad. Also, one of the few Latinas at the time. So I got called out a lot to translate and things like that. So even at a very early stage in my career, I was able to get involved in homicide investigations and things like that, first starting on the periphery, translating, and then later getting more deeply involved. While I was there on the department, I decided that I wanted to see about moving up, so it's a competitive process to get promoted, and over the years, I was able to attain the rank of captain, and so when I was doing that part of the job, at one point I was a precinct commander. At another point I was the department spokesperson. And my last position before I retired as a captain was commander of special investigations and forensics. So with all that going on, after I retired, I thought, well, I will, let me see about writing, because I've always loved to read, and I would read other books about law enforcement, especially females in law enforcement. And I just felt like it's not accurate to how my experiences and the experiences of other women in law enforcement. So I thought, I want to write a strong female character, but not a cartoon. And I do feel like sometimes I see it. It's like it goes one of two ways. And I'll get into it, probably at a later opportunity, but I had an opportunity to speak to some Hollywood scriptwriters who were working on adapting some stuff of mine, and they kept wanting the female to, bend over and vomit at the scene of a gruesome, and I'm like, oh, come on, please no. I have been to so many crime scenes and seen and smelled the most horrific things. Never once did I toss my cookies. It's an embarrassment. Stop it. Just stop. So I developed these rules, and they're kind of based on what I do, and so it's like there's no barfing, no crying, no tripping and falling. I cannot tell you how many times I'm like, no with the tripping. If any of you all want it, no, just stop yourself. Make it stop. No tripping and falling. Use another way to get them to be delayed. Something else. Think. Anyway, so, believe me, and there have been plenty of times where I've taken a beating or where I've been in a bad situation. Never because I tripped and fell. Somebody kicked my butt in a fair fight, that's okay. So anyway, but that's one of the things I think that I like to bring to the table is, that kind of realism. The other thing that I think too, and this can sometimes happen with women who write law enforcement characters who are men, and this is a problem I have with that, is sometimes they characterize men in a way that's not realistic either. I mean, I was in a completely male-dominated profession, grew up with brothers, I mean, surrounded by male energy. And of course, you know, at this point, God has given me both a husband and a son. Somehow I have a male dog too. I can't seem to get away. But it's okay because I love men. So, and I portray them in a way, and one of the things I really like is a lot of male readers have come up to me and they're like, you know, I would never read female writers before, but I enjoy reading your stuff. And first of all, it's realistic, but second of all, you don't hate men and you don't come across bashing men all the time. It's like, no, I don't. And, you know, so my men are very three-dimensional as well. And I think that, so those are some sort of tropes I've seen that I try to avoid. But this is kind of, I guess, my mission, and it seems to be working. People are enjoying what I do. So,
And
yeah.
also, we should mention that you are nominated for Best Paperback Original, so there's another nomination. And now let's move to Charlotte. Charlotte is nominated for Best Novel, and she travels from the UK to be here.
Terribly sorry, I'm British, don't worry. I'm a classically trained stage actor, so I don't need a mic. I also write police procedurals, so the only time I've ever been in a police station was I had to pretend to be a member of the royal family for a training exercise for the City of London Police, and they drove me around in a motorcade for a morning. It was great, because I didn't have to go to work, it was fun. Like I said, I'm a classically trained stage actor. I've got an undergraduate degree in history because I love gossip and it is just old tea, and a master's in art history because I just like pretty things. The In Crowd is my second novel in a series. I'm mixed race, so I'm half British, half Jamaican, and I really felt like I wanted to see a character from my background who just didn't live in a high-rise block selling drugs, which feels very much like the narrative that's pushed on sort of British Jamaicans, whereas I've got cousins who are accountants and PhDs in, like, worms, I don't know. They're very clever, they're too smart for me. I used to row, so there's a lot of rowing in the book, it just pops up all the time. Yeah. I don't think I'm that interesting, to be honest. When I was at drama school, this is fairly interesting. My part-time job was selling hats at one of London's remaining traditional hatters in Jermyn Street. So I used to be able to look at someone and tell you how big their head was in centimetres to like 99% accuracy. So I've measured a few famous people's heads, which is I got a bit mad. I had Victoria Beckham come in, but I missed David Beckham by like an inch, and he's the most charming man. But I was really mad at Jason Statham because it was coming up to Christmas and I wanted to buy my dad a flat cap, and Jason Statham bought the one that I meant to put aside. But he did come in with Rosie Huntington-Whiteley. I was like, oh God, he's just gorgeous and whatever. But yeah, Churchill used to buy some of his Homburgs there. It was quite fun. It was the best job I've ever had, actually.
When you hear their backgrounds, and then we'll turn to talking about their books in just a bit, but you can see, listening to you, how the class differences and wealth and status plays into the in crowd so well. Certainly policing in your books, Isabella. And so we'll go this way. Do you want to be last? Carol, why don't you take it away? This is Carol Goodman, and Carol is nominated for Mary Higgins Clark nominee.
Mary Higgins
That's right,
Clark
that's
here.
right.
We are. Thank you. So I have to say that after all those interesting careers that people had before writing, I did not have that. Oh, I did. I was a teacher, but because I've always wanted to write. I knew that I wanted to write when I was 9 years old, and my fourth grade English teacher, Mrs. Dubinsky, introduced creative writing as a topic, and I proceeded to write a 90-page crayon illustrated epic called The Adventures of the Magical Herd, and had so much fun and just kept going that she had to call my mother in for a meeting and saying, it's great that Carol likes this, but she does have to do her other work. So since then, I just kept writing. I wrote tortured adolescent poetry in my teen years. You don't want to see any of that. And then I couldn't figure out, I kept writing short stories, nobody was publishing them. So I realized, well, if I can't make a career of this, I will make a career of making people read other books. So I trained to be a high school teacher, and I taught high school for a couple of years. And now I've been teaching at SUNY New Paltz. I teach creative writing and lit classes, which are the most fun. I had my last class. Well, my last class was supposed to be Friday, but I told them I can't. I'm nominated for the Mary Higgins Clark Award. But I had my last class yesterday, and I said, what fun. I got to spend the semester just talking about Gothic novels with you guys, and I just loved it. So I published my first book just before 40, which felt old at the time and now feels like a million years ago, which it was. And I've kept writing since then, and since, I need other money, I still teach, and I love the combination of teaching and writing. Sort of coincidentally, very often, my books have teachers as characters. And not in this one, but in this one, I like to write books where people like books and talk about books. So there's a lot of, I don't think of them as literary, I think of them as bookish, because there's just the love of reading and books is, I just am always trying to celebrate that.
Thank you. It's interesting because two of you have written books that are in publishing or about book world, and I guess...
World, yeah.
Right. Do you feel the same way about for that reason, Sulari?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of, there's a lot of that old adage is write what you know. And I actually think that's wrong. I think you should write what you're interested in. And for me, the way writing works, there's still a little dark part in my mind and soul which I don't know how it works. Sometimes I just don't know where the stories come from. So a lot of my books that are based around writers and publishing is my attempt to grapple with that question of what makes us who we are, what gives us this passion, this drive, and this need, and where do these stories come from?
Right, exactly. And to go back to Sarah Easter Collins, nominee for Best Novel, tell them a little about you two, because just let me say that when you'll listen to her, and she's lovely, and her novel is wonderful. But when you go to her website, you will want to live her life in Exmoor with lurchers. We're going to learn what a lurcher is. It's not like that guy you dated in French class, but it's really a... Please, take it away, Sarah.
A lurcher is a hound cross. I don't think you use this term in the States, but it's a sort of any sort of hound cross with any sort of other dog, and I have several large ones. So I have one whose head would appear over this table quite happily, and he keeps me company, and I had one who kept me company from the very start of this novel right to the last page, because I was creeping down at sort of 4 o'clock in the morning to write, and he would creep down with me. So we live on Exmoor, which is a national park in the southwest of England. It's one of the smallest national parks in the UK. We're surrounded by wild ponies and deer and sheep and cattle. And I have seen more people in the last 24 hours than I would normally see in about 5 years. Anyway, so I live in the middle of nowhere. I first wrote my first short story at about the age of 12, and I sent it off to a girls' magazine called Jackie that we have in the UK. And I should say I wrote it by hand, and it would have been so full of spelling mistakes. And I still can't spell, thank goodness for spell check. So, and I very kindly got my first rejection about 3 months later, for which I'm actually really grateful, because any of you who've tried to apply to agents will know that it's like this, the process of applying to an agent, and that sometimes they don't reply at all. So I was very grateful to have my first ever rejection at the age of 12. And then for a long time, I was a single parent, so I didn't write for many years. I was teaching and working 6 days a week, starting at 8 o'clock in the morning, often finishing at 9 o'clock at night. And then in about 2015, I got married, and my husband said to me, "What would you really like to be doing with your life?" And I said, "I would like to be writing and painting." And he said, "Well, look, now we're together, we can make this happen." So that's when I moved down to Exmoor. And I started writing and painting, and these are the two great loves of my life. And in fact, my degree was in English and fine art. And I think it's rather amazing that at the age of 17, I somehow managed to work out the two things that were going to sustain me for life. And I absolutely love the process of writing. I love the craftsmanship of taking something, maybe a paragraph, and spending an hour to get it exactly to say what I want it to say. I just love that process. So I was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to write this because it made me so happy to do that. Aww. And so this is my first novel. I'm in the middle of editing my second right now.
Well, that is wonderful. Tell us a little about, Charlotte, why don't you take it and talk a little bit about what your novel's about? And I just want to say I've read these novels. They're phenomenal. I don't know if there's a book room, but you must order them. You'll just love them. They're totally different. There's a diversity, I think, of story and a voice. But the thing that they share in common is what we all love. They're twisty. In fact, we're going to be really careful not to spoil anything because these books are so twisty. There were so many times I didn't see it coming, and I'm supposed to be able to see it coming. So, Charlotte, why don't you tell us a little bit about The In Crowd? Oh, rats. Hold on.
Well, The In Crowd is the second in the series, and our detective in it, D.I. Caius Beauchamp, he is grappling with two seemingly unrelated cold cases. One where the CEO of a family kind of luxury coat manufacturer absconds in the 80s with the pension fund, and he's never found, and they think he flew to Brazil. And then the other is a schoolgirl who goes missing from a British boarding school on the windswept coast of Cornwall in 2014 and is never found. So he's grappling with those two. One thing I try to do with my novels, because they are police procedurals, because I had to turn them into police procedurals to make the ideas work, because otherwise it would have just been about loads of navel-gazing, really annoying people. And the wonderful thing about police procedurals is stuff happens. And I don't mind a little bit of navel-gazing. I love a bit of character development, but I also really love a good plot. And that's what's so wonderful about crime novels, is that you've got like the scaffolding is there, and you can flesh it out however you want, and you can talk about whatever else interests you. That's what makes it so interesting and such a wonderfully diverse genre. So at its heart, it is a police procedural, and that's what drives the plot. But there's also usually like a romance strand. So in this one, Caius, who is, bless him, sort of terminally single, goes to a fringe theatre in the West End of London to see a play called Wankered Wild. I don't know if that's the thing over here, where people take classical plays and do an abridged version, and they get a cast member drunk, and then it all kind of goes wrong. There's one called Shit-Faced Shakespeare, and I called it Wankered Wild, and it was the importance of beering earnest. He sits next down to a very beautiful milliner, because I used to sell hats, so I didn't have to think too hard about that one. The drunk cast member throws up on the gentleman next to him, who then turns out to be dead. It's not a spoiler, it literally happens in the second chapter, so you're all good there. And that sort of kicks off the events.
Okay, so this is book 2 in what is apparently going to be a trilogy. Well, the third one just came out, so I'm doing something else now, so I guess it's a trilogy. Anyway, this is book 2, but it's okay, because I do believe in writing books that can stand on their own. I like to leave with a little, like something that leads into the next book, but I do resolve everything in each book. You can read them in any order, because even though I believe that you are contractually obligated to start with book 1, I understand there's many rebellious readers that will do their own thing, so I make it possible. So this entire series, all of my series are set, I have 4 of them, all of them are set in different places. This one is right here in New York City. So if you love New York, this is it. And I am not a native New Yorker, but my agents are. I have 2 of them, and they drove me around all over the place. One of them actually wrecked her car driving me around, but nobody was hurt.
Did she charge you?
No, she didn't. But it was It was amazing, but anyway, so yeah, but I because I needed to understand how New York works and how you get around and the differences and everything, and I spent a lot of time. So, and a lot of people fact check me because it needs to be accurate. But basically, what this is about is it's an FBI agent, and she ends up hunting a serial killer. Not on purpose, it doesn't start off that way, but she gets involved with it. Now, what I did was I decided that, I wanted to make this character very different from all of my previous ones. Wanted her to stand out, so I gave her a military background, which I have not done before. I had to do tons of research to the point of getting like Army manuals and things like that. So, but I also made her a military code breaker because apparently I'm a masochist. And I'm like, oh, writing isn't difficult enough. Let me make codes and, and riddles and clues and encryptions and put them in the book. And let me do this so she has to crack a bunch of codes. And who's going to make them? Oh, yeah, me. I am not a code breaker, but I had to learn all kinds of things about it. So, I mean, if you like that sort of thing, if that's your jam, I do write it in such a way that you can try to crack the code, and then I give you the answer like a page or two later. So for those who, feel like they want to give it a try, and a lot of people do, some of them are harder than others, but, it just added an extra dimension. But it was a lot of fun, and very complicated and complex. The other challenge that I gave myself with this book was I sort of resolved the mystery like shortly after the midpoint of the book, as far as like, in a lot of, I enjoy, sometimes I get a kick out of the reader feedback. A lot of readers were like, I saw there was a whole bunch of the book to read and I already knew what happens. And then they go, but you know what? I was on my edge of my seat the whole way through because it turns out there was a lot more to it. And it kept unraveling and unraveling and unraveling. So, and I really enjoy that. It's a twist and then another twist. And just when you think it's over, it's another twist. And I get so much of a kick out of that. But yeah, this was a labor of love and agony in many ways. But it turns out, a lot of readers really liked it. So that was good.
I think you make such a good point. And I think, Sarah, you said it maybe because you're a painter and you talked about how novels are like layering. And I felt that when I read each of yours. First, Charlotte, yours with this sort of satirical edge that was so entertaining. And yours, Isabella, with that such an interesting family background that you guys, I'll let you talk about it later. But I think every one of you did that in one way or another. Sarah, do you want to talk about yours, your novel?
So Things Don't Break on Their Own begins with a dinner party. It's a gathering of friends and relatives, some of whom know each other very well and some of whom have never met before. And one of the guests is the ex-lover of one of the hosts, but that is the least complicating factor in the whole evening, because this guest, her name is Willa, her sister went missing 25 years before. And in the course of that evening, she's going to pretty much find out what happened because somebody else at the dinner party knows exactly what happened. So things are going to sort of start unraveling. So it sort of dips between the past and the present. And I have 3 narrators who tell the story. And several of the scenes are repeated from different people's points of view. So it's a little bit like turning a kaleidoscope. So each time, say, the dinner party scene is repeated, the reader gets a totally different perspective on what happened before. And they see a new view, a new sense of, oh, I didn't see that happening in that scene before. But that is how we are at events. It's very possible that we can go to the same thing and each of us witness something completely different. In storytelling, that's called the Rashomon effect. And this sense that I will remember something very differently from how you remember it.
What is it called?
It's called the Rashomon effect.
Oh, okay.
After the 1950s film,
Right.
Rashomon, where, and it's, in fact, it's been quoted in court cases. because it is so significant, this idea that we will not all remember the same thing. So that allowed me in the retelling of the dinner party to actually have a lot of fun with it and to put different words and phrases in each character's mouth with each retelling. So that, because I could say, well, this person remembered it in a totally different way. So I actually had a lot of, that was for me most the both challenging part of writing the novel and also the most fun part. So at one point, I remember I had about 4 versions on my computer screen of, okay, so they said this then, and now I'm going to make them say this now, and it was a lot of fun to write that bit. Yeah.
Carol, go ahead. Tell them about your book.
So the Return to Wyldcliffe Heights is, as I said, I teach Gothic literature. I love the Gothic. So I just went full goth in this one. So it's about a young editorial assistant. And I forgot to mention in my CV before that I very briefly worked in publishing, but I wasn't very good at it. It was back in the day when you had to type by hand, and I was terrible. Perhaps now I'd be better. So Agnes is an editorial assistant at a very small independent publishing house in New York. And she goes to work there particularly because they published the book that she loved the most, that her mother always had with her, and that she read many, many times. And it's The Secret of Wyldcliffe Heights, very much a Jane Eyre or Rebecca-inspired book. So she goes to work there, and she one of her jobs is handling the fan mail, and she sends her own letter to the reclusive author of Return to Wyldcliffe, Secret of Wyldcliffe Heights, suggesting that she write a sequel. And the author writes back and asks for her particularly to come up to her house in the Hudson Valley and be her amanuensis. Because she's blind. She was blinded. The author was blinded in a fire 20 years before, and she has never written another book. So how more goth can you get than that? So Agnes goes up there into the Hudson Valley, and she goes, and I love the Hudson. I live in the Hudson Valley, and there is an estate called Wyldcliffe near where I live that looks like that, almost, but it's a ruin. You can. You're not supposed to go explore it. I did once, jumped over the gate and everything with my daughter. So there are a lot of these kind of decaying houses, and some of them, this one turns out that it has a history of having been an institution of refuge for wayward girls. And there were places like this in the Hudson Valley. So I've come across the ruins of them, or buildings that had once been women's prisons or orphanages. And so this one has this history of having been a refuge for wayward women, which meant women who maybe didn't play by the rules. And then it had been a psychiatric hospital in the 60s. So she begins working with this sort of imperious, reclusive author who's blind and scarred, and bits of her own past begin to be filtered in with the story. So that's the mystery of it, what the book means to her. I won't spoil anything, but it's that process of her. And even though it's narrated, almost all my books are narrated in the first person by a woman. Even though it's narrated by her, you get the story. Veronica St. Clair, the author, is telling her life story to Agnes, and so we get her voice as well. And so we get a few layered stories, a few past stories in the book.
Yeah, I think that's really true. You do get the voice of the author and her viewpoint.
Yeah.
In a way, I thought that was so interesting and kind of deft how you did that, because she isn't a character per se.
Right, she doesn't have a point of view. And I've
Exactly.
done that occasionally, where I've done shifting points of view, and that's my, and so here was a way. And also, you get a little, we're sort of, unlike your book, you're a bit stuck in the narrator's point of view. So to bring in another voice, I was looking for some way of doing that.
And it worked. I mean, I was like, this is very, very cool. Sulari, go ahead.
So I think as a writer, I'm probably exactly the opposite of Isabella. I'm lazy. So there's my modern fiction, or the ones that are contemporary, tend to involve writers and lawyers, because I know writers and lawyers, so I don't have to work or research. The idea of building codes is going to give me cold sweats for a few months. And my style of writing, or my process, is also incredibly relaxed, for want of a better word. I just get up and I start to write. I don't plot. I have no idea what's going on. I get up, I put on my work pajamas, gather the dogs, and I start to write.
Truffle dogs.
I have one truffle dog and 3 layabouts. And in fact, the truffle dog's turning into a bit of a layabout as well, but that's another story. So the mystery writer came out of a curiosity or a wandering I have, and that's usually how my books start. I have something that I'm thinking or wondering about. The mystery writer came out of the contemporary world, and this sudden rise in hello. The sudden rise in conspiracy theories. And I was actually thinking about the readership that conspiracy theorists have. They're the kind of things that we novelists are very, very envious of, because conspiracy theories get away with things that a novelist could never hope to. In terms of, when you take your book to an editor, one of the things they check for is plausibility. And the amount that we can stretch plausibility as novelists seems to be a little bit shorter, or a great deal shorter, than what a conspiracy theorist can. So I was intrigued about the kind of people that come up with these conspiracy theories, because they are really very, very creative. And I was intrigued about what gets them together, because, as a writer, what you want is that kind of spark that the conspiracy theory has for a novel. What makes them explode so that everybody suddenly believes it? And then the people who attach to a conspiracy theory are exactly the kind of readers you want, because they adhere to the theory, and anything that counters that, they don't care. They don't want to know, and they will make up excuses for you. So that's the kind of the readers that a novelist typically would love to have. So it was just in those sort of playful considerations that I started thinking about who these people are, and I started to wonder about whether they are in fact just writers without conventional publishers. And from that I started to wonder about writer's voice. So when I first was published, there was a thing in Australia at the time to media train your writers, so that they didn't get out there and blither. But it also meant that the human ear is very good at picking up that sort of thing. So you can always tell a media-trained writer, they drop the name of their novel into every third sentence. They very, sheepishly mention the great reviews. All of that sort of thing, and you can pick it up. And I was looking at the end of that, the end game of that, and especially in a time where people were being cancelled for things that they were saying, and you were having this debate about whether you could separate the art from the writer. So you had great writers of the past, and then it comes out that their personal lives weren't so great. Does that mean that their art was any less? So as a lawyer, I was sort of thinking, if I was advising a publishing company, what would I say to them about minimising that risk, that you spend a heck of a lot of money to get behind a writer, and then there's a whole stack of jobs that hang off that writer's work, and then they do something that gets them cancelled and gets them thrown out. So what I would have done as a corporate lawyer is I would have said to them, you need to get control of your writers. you've got to actually contain them and make sure that what they say socially is controlled. Of course, I would not allow that to happen to me, but as a lawyer, that's what I would advise. And so I started playing with what's the end of that? Does that mean that if you take a writer's individual voice and so that their art can get the biggest and cleanest review, and you control them, can you weaponize that? Can you commercialize that? So the mystery writer plays on all of those things. It's set in Lawrence, Kansas, where I've never been. I didn't drive around it. I took the lazy approach, and I found someone who was from Lawrence, Kansas, and who loved it, and who was willing to talk to me about it. And sometimes I find that works for me as a writer better. Sometimes when you're too wedded in the actual physicality of the place, it interferes with the story. And when in Australia, I'm known as a writer of place. I'm supposedly very good at getting the place right. But the reality is I don't write place, I write people. And if you get the people right, they bring the place with them. And so that's what I try to do. So the characters I wrote, I hope embodied all the nuances of Lawrence, Kansas, and brought that with them into the book. So yeah, that's basically the mystery writer without any spoilers.
Now, if we talk about viewpoint, which is theoretically the title of the panel, I thought the question was kind of like, can you juggle? How to keep multiple storylines straight and carry them through to the end without dropping a single ball? I thought, how do you do that? You basically write it down. That's the short answer. But what I sort of wanted to begin the conversation with Charlotte talking a little, because I think your viewpoints in the in crowd are so interesting and distinct, and they're people who work together. But sort of, I guess the initial question is, how do you decide whether you're going to do a single point of view or multiple, and talk about the multiples you have in your novel? Oopsie.
I'm also a big fan of spreadsheets and colour coding them. So I'm a visual person, I did art history, so I will write down the chapter, have a little summary of what's happened in it, just a sentence, and then whose POV it is, and then I can look at it visually and be like, Wednesday, it's very yellow, that's too much police, something personal needs to happen. So then I'll make sure I wedge in a chapter at the end of the day. That'll be from Caius's point of view when he's at home doing squats in the garden because he's sad. So just that's how I manage that. Also, editors are wonderful human beings. I think we sort of touched on it earlier. The police procedural part really drives the plot, and then I get to essentially write a romance novel on top of it and do something completely different, and that's lovely. I mean, my favourite writer is Jane Austen, and I was one of those kids who'd come home and watch the 1995 Colin Firth version I had it on VHS, and I'd sit in the room with like a bowl of Rice Krispies after school every day as a 13. I didn't have friends. And I'm obsessed with Jane Austen and Ian Forster. So I really wanted to be able to kind of write that at the same time, which is quite nice. So it's almost like I've written two novellas that just the characters overlap. I use colour. That's how I make sure that I haven't gone too heavy. Also, the trick that I do, because I'm cheating it here, is I use days. So I'll be like Monday, and then you tell them it's Monday, and then you've got the line and a page that just tells you that it's Monday. And then because I trained as an actor, so I almost approach writing as if I'm writing a script. So I'll put the place underneath the chapter, police station, so I don't have to describe it every time. So you go, okay, we're in the police station, and then I write the dialogue, because it's the dialogue where people tell you the most interesting facts that you need to know as a reader to work it out. So do the dialogue first, and then in further edits I then go back, and then we'll add in the little kind of the quips, because I think I'm funny. I'm sometimes funny. So that gets added in. I also really like clothes, you might have guessed, and there's a sub-theme. I always think of themes and sub-themes, and there's a sub-theme in this on fast fashion. So it's something I'm personally interested in, and the environmental impact. So I could kind of weave that in on top of all the other things. It's like we're talking about layers. So you've got your core plot, you've got that being driving the whole novel, and then I can add all the other little layers and hope that I'm funny in the process. The Guardian called me witty. There you go. Hello, I'm a media trained. No, I'm not. But you know, if it was in the Guardian, that's what I told my ex-husband. The Guardian said I was witty. You get to be the last sentence in my obituary.
Yeah, why don't you talk about your technique with respect to viewpoint, how you make that decision, and also you have such a you have a character in there who is a very distinct and terrific viewpoint.
Yeah, if you're afraid of the dark, don't read my books. If you like the mysteries where the cat solves the crime, yeah, I'm not your author. Anyway, no, I like those, but I don't write them.
But it's the book is dynamite.
So I always do multiple POV, and the reason that it's a very strategic choice for me. The reason that I do that is I use my law enforcement background to really write from the perspective of the villain in a realistic way. And for me, it's always a killer of some sort. In this case, a serial killer, but not always a serial killer. All kinds of different perpetrators, but because I have had so much experience speaking with criminals. And one thing I've learned, and this is really a key takeaway, it was for me, I'll give it to you for free. It took me a lot of years to learn this the hard way. Every villain is the hero of their own story. And that is true. And I used that when I was interrogating people. Despite, I'm going to date myself with a reference to Andy Sipowicz in the famous New York City phone book, but you do not abuse someone that you're interviewing in order to get a confession. It doesn't work. You need to be, empathetic, sympathetic with them, even if they did something despicable. So you're not judging them, whatever, but to do that, you have to be able to get into their own perspective. I also used that when I was a hostage negotiator for several years. One of the ways that you negotiate with someone who's in a state of crisis is you have to put yourself in their position. Otherwise, they're not going to talk to you. So you have to do the mental gymnastics, is another term I use for that. So multiple POV is critical to me because for me, I really want to show what the villain's thinking, what the villain's doing. And as far as juggling the balls, I'll summarize it really quickly by saying a lot of times what I'll do to avoid, because I write a really fast-paced thriller, it's like step on the gas and don't let up. So what I do is I always stop and think, wait a minute, what's the bad guy up to right now? Oh, let's go find out. And then I go right from that perspective.
That's perfect. That is exactly what happens in that book. Carol, you want to take it away? And I don't want, is it 5 minutes till question period? No. Oh, sugar. I mean, shit. Do you guys have questions? Okay, all right, just go, Carol, go ahead, I'm sorry. Talk about viewpoints. I think you build suspense with it so well.
Well, and as I said, this is one viewpoint, and I don't use a lot of viewpoints. But I did want to say, first of all, I love that you said you were lazy, and then the spreadsheet. I don't figure out any of that. I just do it instinctually in the first draft. I'm totally a pantser, and then I do it all in revision, where I figure out what did not work. So if you suddenly were like, oh my God, do I need spreadsheets to write? I love that you do have those spreadsheets, but I don't use them at all. But the lazy and or spreadsheet spectrum, I always tell my students, everybody starts on one end of that spectrum, lazy or perfectionist, and we all have to come to the middle at some point. We all have to work towards that.
Organic. Let's use organic love.
I'm late. I feel I started out lazy, so that's why I identified with that.
Sarah, do you want to throw in your thought? And then
I would just say the only sort of information I write down is in the editing process. I write down things that actually aren't in the novel, like people's dates of birth, and then I make sure I correspond that in terms of dates of when things are happening. And then I also have 2 more columns, one of which is with world events, because I think there are some world events you cannot ignore. So, for example, if you're writing over the COVID period, you can't just totally ignore it. And the other one, I keep a column for technology, because it changes so fast. And I think you need to know when Facebook became Facebook and people started using it, or when Twitter became X, because those sort of things date so very, very quickly. And I think you do need to know when they are.
Yeah.
So I went
Yep.
through real quick and then we'll
Yeah,
take some questions.
the only thing I'll say about point of view is that my latest novels are set in the US, and I'm very aware that I'm Australian, and the last thing I want to do is offend my US readers by doing them badly. So I tend to write as my major protagonist an Australian expatriate. So then I can look at the US through Australian eyes and it has authenticity, but I can still bring in, other characters and US settings. And the book is essentially set here, but it means that I get out of being caught accidentally being Australian.
God forbid. Okay, any questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, a question for Charlotte. Writing police procedurals from a decidedly non-law enforcement background.
Yeah.
Where did you go to research Metropolitan Police procedures?
Well, they're quite open. There's a lot of stuff available on the internet, but I was also weaned on Agatha Christie, and I watch a lot of crime TV. There's a series in the UK, I don't know if it was popular over here, called Line of Duty, and it's very procedural based. So I think, and I sort of write it more from the whodunit end rather than the technical end, because I'm aware that I just can't. I don't have the knowledge, and so I write it more from the other end. I also have a couple of friends who are police. And actually, one of my good friends who's a police officer is also a cheerleader, which I think is quite fun, because I try to write, my books are slightly uplifting, and yeah. And everyone I know who's a police officer is always generally quite cheerful.
Other questions? Anybody else? Yes, sir. I'll repeat it, just shout it.
One thing I've noticed about female sleuths is, whereas men can be coldly intellectual, no. Whereas women, a man, the most famous detective of all says, women just get in the way, they're distracting everything. They do not take that attitude toward men. Whereas the female private eye patterns herself after male. The female intellectual detective doesn't seem to have that delightful intellectual coldness that makes Sherlock Holmes and Hercule Poirot and Giroux so exciting.
Next question. I'm only kidding. Isabel, I'm going to hand that to you, because I'll answer it briefly, and I'm vamping for you. The way I think of that, because I've written female amateur sleuths, and actually professional ones as well, is that every character is his or herself. So there is no way to generalize. So there will be some Scarpetta is very chilly, delightfully so. And I think, how am I doing?
Yeah, that's good. Or I don't write a PI, but I understand the point. And so that's part of why, actually, what you're bringing up, I made the rules. No barfing, no crying, no tripping, no falling, and no being rescued. No. So yeah, I think that a strong female lead character can be done in a way that brings in the analytical side, but also there is the underpinnings. So I do think some of the detectives that you may have mentioned, you do sometimes wonder with Hercule Poirot, what is going on in his personal life? When he goes home, So I think for me, having lived that life, it's important to show there are both sides. When you go to work as a police detective, you take all the baggage with you. And if you do it the right way, you can actually be far more effective in your job.
Right, and I just wanted to sort of add to that I think you're looking at a very emblematic, all-female panel. Now, I've been in this business a long time. This is kind of groundbreaking stuff. Hats off to mystery writers, because I think we've always promoted women, we've helped other women, sisters in crime. I know we have sisters in crime members here. I think the question's really apropos, because I think your point about here's this list of things that women always do is kind of a way to take away from the female power of the protagonist. And so I think each of you in your own lives and certainly in your own novels, are showing us a way to be a woman and be a hero, and it's friggin' badass and terrific. So thank you all for coming. I do hope you'll get their novels. Their novels are simply sensational, and we're very grateful. Thank you all. Ladies, thank you. Please sign.
And thank you, Lisa, for being fantastic at moderating.